Hello and welcome to yet another live virtual event with Tattered Cover. My name is Adam. I'm the director of events for Tattered Cover Bookstore, which is in Denver, Colorado. However, today is a very international event that I'm very excited for. Before I get to that, though, I do want to say if you need closed captioning, there is a black bar at the bottom of your YouTube video. You can go ahead and click CC, that's closed captioning for anyone who wants or needs it. If you are interested in more virtual events with Tattered Cover or in person, because we are doing them, even though, we might not be in the future, but currently we're doing in-person events, but virtual or in-person, tatteredcover.com/events. That'll get you all of our upcoming events. Today, I am very excited to welcome a debut author who's releasing her paperback. Carole Johnstone is releasing Mirrorland. She will be in conversation with L. Allison Heller. Carole Johnstone's, I didn't actually ask for a clarification. So Carole, I'm sorry. I can't believe I did not do this. This is what a live virtual event looks like. Carole's award-winning short fiction has appeared in the annual Best of anthologies in both the US and the UK. She lives, according to her, in the middle of nowhere, Scotland, with her husband. Mirrorland is her debut novel. L. Allison Heller is a lawyer and author of contemporary woman fiction novels, including The Neighbor's Secret, which was just released, The Never Never Sisters, and The Love Wars. Please welcome Carole and Allison, who will be talking about Mirrorland. Carole, I'm so sorry. Is it Johnstone?
It's not. Annoyingly, it should be, but it's pronounced Johnstone.
Okay, see, I should have asked before. I'm terribly sorry for not getting a correction in there, correct pronunciation. I'll turn it over to you. I'm just going to hop off. We're here for you, Carole. Congratulations on Mirrorland coming out. It's a terrific book.
Thank you, Adam.
Thank you so much, Adam. I'm Allison, and I'm so excited to be here discussing Mirrorland. I'm going to hold it up, beautiful paperback. And it has been praised by Stephen King, Ruth Ware, People Magazine, the New York Times, BuzzFeed, many, many, many more, and for excellent reason. It is an expertly crafted thriller that's also a nuanced examination of trauma and how people get through it and how trauma can impact family dynamics. And it just, from the moment I picked it up and opened it, I was completely gripped. A lot of the reviewers note how gripping this book is. So first, I wanted to say thank you so much for writing it. And I'm very excited to talk to you. And you should also know that it's normally in Denver, it is very sunny. And today is this like overcast, snowy day. And I thought this was so perfect for our discussion because setting this book has a definite mood. And I just kind of pictured the gray sky and meeting the gray sea. And then at the center of this book, there is a building that is also kind of a character. Actually, let me back up before I get to the setting. Can you describe the plot? Do you mind just like describing briefly the plot of Mirrorland?
Yeah, no, definitely. And thank you, Alison. I think that's been the most amazing introduction I've ever had.
Ever. I'm sure I doubt that. But.
No, thank you so much. So Mirrorland is a Gothic psychological thriller. It's set in Edinburgh in Scotland, and it's about estranged identical twin sisters, Kat and Elle. They're actually mirror twins, which means that rather than being identical, they're mirror reflections of each other. Kat lives in LA, and Elle lives with her husband Ross in the very kind of big, creepy old house that she and Kat grew up in Leith, which is the sort of port district of Edinburgh. And at the beginning of the novel, Kat has to return to Scotland because Elle goes missing in her sailing boat. And Kat discovers that someone, she believes Elle, has set her a treasure hunt. Clues have been left all over this house for her to find, like Elle used to do when they were kids. And these clues force Kat to confront her relationship or her non-relationship with her sister, because they've been estranged for 12 years. Her very complicated relationship with her sister's husband, Ross, and the very unusual and often frightening childhood that she and Elle shared growing up in that house, and in particular the sinister and magical world of Mirrorland that they created underneath the house, because that's where all the secrets of their childhood, of their lives, and actually what has happened to Elle are buried. And that's about all I can say without giving anything away.
I know, and there are so many twists and turns in this book, and there are so many great reveals. And I think it won't manage, but I was very aware of not trying to ask something that would require a spoiler. So about the house. The house is this. I mean, it really is like a character. There's a macabre feel to it. There's at times sometimes a funhouse feel in the way that Kat describes the house. And when she returns, she's sort of walking through it, and it's bringing up these memories. I thought that was just by way of craft. It was so amazing to me how the setting intertwined with plot, because as she's going through the house and describing the house, there are clues revealed to the reader. We don't understand what they mean, but they do tie into sort of the secret of what happened in their childhood. So I was wondering and at times when I was picturing the house, I was thinking this is a beautiful place, in a Gothic sort of way. But I imagined it as, I even thought at one point, like, oh, if someone went in and knocked down some walls, like, I bet it would be an amazing place to live. But how did you, I kind of pictured you at one point I was wondering if it was based on a place you had seen or visited. And I pictured you at one point, like after I read it, because I was too gripped to picture this while I was reading it, but with like an architect's model of the house, so that to kind of choreograph the flow and how things, where action was happening and when. So how fully realized was this house in your mind, and what was the inspiration, I guess, is the compound question.
I think it's probably got two answers. So the more kind of broad answer is that I really love Gothic fiction. I've loved it I've just loved it since forever. I grew up loving books like Jane Eyre and Wuthering Heights, Rebecca, Beloved. I loved Beloved. The Haunting of Hill House, The Turn of the Screw, all those kind of books. Yeah. And I think that Gothic stories, they're huge on atmosphere. It's usually very beautiful, but it's also usually quite dark. Mm-hmm. They're also really, the setting is massively important to a Gothic novel. It can't just be set anywhere. It is, like you said, another character almost. Well, in fact, it is. I think in Gothic novels, you always have love and passion and conflict. But again, it's always the kind of darker side of that. So you have love triangles, and you have betrayal and affairs and all that kind of stuff. You have an unreliable narrator. But the thing that kind of drives a Gothic story is mystery. There's always a big mystery or a big secret kind of underpinning everything, and it kind of gets gradually revealed through the story. So I knew that I wanted to write a sort of contemporary psychological thriller, but I wanted it to feel very Gothic. So I think Mirrorland is kind of like both of those things.
Yes.
And when I sat down to kind of plot it, I'd had this idea for ages that I wanted to write a story about estranged identical twin sisters, because I find twins fascinating.
And there's something Gothic about, there's something,
there really, really is. And I wanted to write about a decade-long love triangle, because again, that's another thing that I really love to read about. I wanted to write about a big kind of dark, creepy house with lots of secrets, because I love haunted house stories and Gothic stories. And I wanted to write something that had a huge mystery or secret kind of at the heart of it that needed to be explained at some point, needed to be exposed. And I knew I wanted to do all these things. And what I needed to do was pick a good place, a good setting for that. And originally I'd planned on setting it in I thought the Scottish Highlands, some part, I mean, there's whole parts of Scotland has a very small population really, but it's a big country, and there are great big swathes of it that are just uninhabited, because it's certainly in the central and Highland, the centre of the Highlands, there's just nothing there. It's a very difficult place to live. So that was my idea. I was going to set it in a great big isolated mansion in the middle of nowhere, a bit like Hill House, you know, something huge and sprawling. But every time I sat down to even just plot it and outline it, never mind write it, I kept thinking about my grandparents' house. And every time I did it, I kept thinking about it over and over and over again. So, you know, I mean, you'll know what this is like when you're thinking about a scene or you're writing a scene, you have things in your head. You know, you kind of envisage the area that you're working in, and if it's a house, you kind of have to imagine how you would get from this room to this room. You just have to do it. You have to have it in your head. And I kept using their house, and at first I thought, oh, this is annoying, but then after a wee while I started to think, oh, hang on, why don't I use their house? So my grandparents lived in Leith, which is where the book is set, so the sort of Port District of Edinburgh. And it was a 200-year-old Georgian villa. And it was a very weird house. It was a very eccentric house.
Were there service bells?
There were, yes.
Was there a clown room?
There wasn't, but there was a room. There was a room. I mean, I know what room in their house was the clown room.
You do? You were like, this room is,
Yeah. I mean, in the UK version of the novel, at the very beginning, there's a floor plan, and it's my grandparents' house. So every room that is in the book is my grandparents' house. It was a really strange house. My sister and I spent a lot of time there in the 80s and 90s when we were growing up. My grandparents died at the end of the 90s, late 90s. So I have no idea what this house looks like now, but the house in Mirrorland is what it was then.
Wow.
And it was such a strange house. It wasn't a particularly big house, but it was, there was no central heating. There were leaks constantly in the roof everywhere. There were buckets in every room in the house, you know, at least in the first floor. And there was a huge, the house was kind of built on the hill. There was a huge stone vaulted cellar underneath the house. And we weren't allowed in it because there was this fear that the whole thing was about to collapse at any moment. So it was a really cool house. I mean, me and my sister lived in a 1970s bungalow. It was the complete opposite of
nooks and crannies.
Exactly. And so pretty much when I kind of gave in and thought, well, why don't I set it in this house? Because I started to think it would be a bit cool to set this, because 36 Westwick Road, which was the address of Cat and Elle's house, my grandparents' house, was this house.
Wait, was it the same address?
No, it wasn't.
Okay.
I changed it because I always did do that because it was a great address, and I thought, oh, these poor people, they, you know,
that's what I'm picturing.
Yeah. So no, I changed it, and the number is different, but yeah, I thought it would be cool to have this house where all these huge and terrible and bizarre things happen, to happen in a capital city, to happen with neighbors all around who have no idea what's going on. Because in a sense, Mirrorland is like that too. You know, Mirrorland is this fantasy world that the sisters create as children underneath their house, and it's a world inside a world. So I kind of thought, oh, that's kind of, why don't I just do that? And it, to be honest, most of it, I reckon at least 50% of it was, it's easier to write about somewhere that I know.
Completely. But also your brain was sort of telling you, no, right here. And then I'm thinking in terms of, without giving away spoilers, there is a neighbor who gets intertwined with the twins. And then there are the missing twin, Elle, has somewhat of a community And so I also think it's very interesting that a lot of plot points actually then, or a lot of the way the book came together was helped by the city setting.
It definitely was. And I think you're absolutely right. I think that these were all things that maybe I subconsciously realized I'd need, but didn't know at the beginning. And I kept trying to fit, a square peg into a round hole. And I don't think that I realized it wasn't going to work until I thought, oh, for God's sake, I will just write about my grandparents.
Just write about. Were you excited? And I have so many more questions, but when you were a kid, were you excited to go to your grandparents, or were you also? Yeah, you. Okay,
my
you
God,
weren't terrified.
No, because I think kids love to be scared.
Yeah.
They really do, but in a safe way, I mean, we loved that house. It was it was a crazy house. My parents used to hate going. It was where my mum grew up. But my dad hates anywhere cold, and he used to dread going there because it was freezing. It's freezing
and leaky.
Cold.
Yeah.
And leaky. Yeah. But as kids, I mean, there were loads of us. I had lots of cousins. We'd all stay there together. And, we'd play all these games around the house. We'd go into all these kind of creepy rooms. I mean, they all had weird names. And we never really knew what half their functions were. And, we made all these, well, I generally made up all these stories. I was the oldest.
Oh, you were?
I was the permanent baby.
You were the poison taster?
Yes, exactly.
We'll get to that later, yeah.
And I would make up all these stories and scare them about things that had happened in this house, And even Mirrorland, this kind of fantasy world, it was in the book, it's a covered alleyway that runs along the side of the house, isn't it? This kind of wooden covered alleyway.
Yeah.
And then you have this little square stone wash house that is kind of the boundary between the alleyway and the back garden.
Yeah.
And this wash house and this alleyway is where the sisters have Mirrorland, this secret world. And those two things existed in my grandparents' house as well, that they were our den. That was where we were allowed to play with no kind of supervision.
Oh.
But it was very different. I mean, I've made it look a lot more glamorous in the book than it was in real life, but
I mean,
these places were there.
Yeah, because I have so many questions about Mirrorland, and also the role of pretend play in the book. It is, first of all, I think I was wondering if you had ever done YA or done young adult, because I'm convinced that there are human beings, there are writers who can sort of tap into their childhood. And I'm not talking strictly about memories, but just sort of tap into and channel, remember how it felt to be a kid. And I wondered if you had ever written YA or young adult, or if you have that ability, because I mean, first of all, the role, there's like so many levels of pretend play in this novel. There is the pretend play of the treasure hunt, that sort of, there is a game of pretend going on a sort of meta, big spoiler, won't say anything about it level. There is sort of this, and then there is this notion of the stories the sisters tell themselves in the fantasy life they make up. And it seemed to me that had an element of protection too, like they were maybe trying to control or make sense of some of the trauma that they were going through their active pretend life. But I felt like it reminded me of being a kid in a way that very few things have. I feel like you tapped into something so real, because it's the Gothic horror. Like on the one hand, in the kids, it was so fantastical and dramatic. They're pretend this, and rooms have themes and everything has a name, and there's like this fairy tale sensibility. So this magical thinking of childhood. But then on the other hand, there's also this acceptance, and this is how it is. Like we live in this environment, and we're explaining this culture, and we're kind of maybe not asking questions about things because this is all we know. So there was the powerlessness to it. I feel like I just word saladed you, but so do you feel like you are in touch with that? You, Carole, can channel, younger Carole at the drop of a hat, or were you like, were you observing children? I just felt like it was so well realized.
Oh, thank you,
That's not a
Alison.
question, but
No, I think when I was in my kind of teens and 20s, I wrote so many unfinished novels that would be considered YA, because obviously I was YA, and I loved writing them. And there's
Yeah.
loads of them now that I think, oh, I'd love to go back to that.
Yeah.
I love reading YA. I really think that the connection, and I think this is only something that comes when you reach a certain age. I think the connection between who you were as a young adult and who you were as a child is so important to who you become as an adult, but more as an adult now, as an adult. I mean, I've only really started feeling like an adult in my late 30s, early 40s, and I think it really informs your life so much. And I don't think people realize it until they look back. I can remember, I mean, this might be an old age memory thing, but I can remember things from when I was younger more than I can remember things that happened, last month or last year. And I would really, I'm really glad that you said that you felt like I was kind of tapping into to young, because that was really difficult. I wanted to make sure that I did it correctly, because it's exactly like you said. These two sisters, they have very traumatic things happen to them, very huge things happening to them very young. And the way that they sort of deal with that is very, very strange, and it informs their entire lives. I'm going to go off on a big man tangent here, but I'm fascinated by memory. Yeah, I've always been fascinated by memory, but I'm particularly fascinated by childhood memories, and particularly childhood memories that are big, where something huge has happened in someone's life. And when I was I mean, this is a long story, but I'll try and make it short. I bet
it'll be a good one, though.
When I was at my grandparents' house as a kid, we used to play this game called Sardines. I don't know if you've ever heard of it.
Yeah, but I remember nothing, which is also part of why I was so impressed.
It's kind of like,
so explain sardines for the benefit of anyone who's listening who doesn't know, because that's not me.
It's an inverted hide and seek, a back to front hide and seek. So one person goes to hide, just one, and everyone else waits till they've hidden. And then you all go and try and find them on your own. And then when someone finds that person, they have to hide with them. And then when the next person finds them, they have to hide as well. So until you're all kind of packed in like sardines. Yeah. And then the last person to find everyone is the loser, is the one that is. So we played this loads in my grandparents' house because it had huge big rooms. The furniture was all massive. It was the kind of furniture you could hide in or under.
Yeah.
And my favorite place in the whole house to hide when we were playing sardines was this very creepy kind of room at the very, very back of their house that my gran called the sewing room. It was where she did all her mending. She had one of those Singer, sewing machines.
Oh, sewing. See, I thought you said the swing room.
And that's even better.
That is the sewing room. Yeah.
Sewing room.
That's less Mirrorland. That is
it's less frightening. So yeah, at the very end of this room, it was right at the back of the house, and it was kind of under the stairs almost. So it was a very kind of forgotten about room. And at the very end of it, it was just this long corridor. There was this huge wardrobe, and it was a wardrobe that if you were a kid, you could get on a stool, climb into, and shut the door. So that was the place that I always hid when we were playing sardines. And I remember, yeah,
they're like, Carole's in this.
She's still there. And it was a great hiding place, but also a bad hiding place, because people did genuinely forget that the room existed.
Oh,
So you could be in there a long time before anyone found you.
yeah.
And it was freezing cold. So but I always remember, and this is a massive memory for me, it's one memory that has never ever changed or altered, that there was a door, a full-size door in the back of this cupboard.
Mhm.
And it was like a normal door, it was exactly like your door, similar to your door behind you, actually. It was 4 vertical panels. It was white. All the paint was peeling though, so you could kind of see the wood underneath. It had one of those ceramic, round ceramic door handles that kind of rattle when you turn them, and it was always locked. And I remember as a child thinking, oh, it's a bit weird that there is a door there, because I knew that was the external wall of the house. And I knew as well, our grandparents' house was built on a slope, so the back of the house was on much lower ground than the front.
Okay.
So to get out of the back of the house into the garden, for example, you had to go down some exterior stairs. So I knew that this door was also about 8 foot off the ground, because the back of the, because this was the back of the house, and this was it would have opened out into the alleyway that runs alongside the house, so where our covered alleyway, where Mirrorland. And I remember it as a kid not thinking it was massively remarkable. I thought it was strange, but not massively remarkable that this door was there. I certainly never questioned it. I think I thought maybe one day, like the Lion and the Witch in the Wardrobe, that maybe one day it would be open and off I'd go and I'd have an adventure. That was about it. And then years and years later, when I started having this idea for writing Mirrorland, I thought, oh, I could use that door as a way of them getting down into Mirrorland, getting down into this alleyway. And I was mentioning it to Mum, because that was the house, she grew up in. And she kind of looked at me and she said, well, there was never a door in the back of that cupboard. Why would there be a door in the back of that cupboard? And I remember being really shocked because, well, firstly, because that it wasn't there, that it had never been there. It's an incredibly vivid memory to me. And then second, that I'd never questioned it, even as an adult, even as a grown up, I'd never thought it was weird that there was this bizarre door that went
8 feet off the ground.
Exactly. Why was it there? I'd never questioned it. And I'd never questioned it because it was a very important memory. And so that was when I started doing all this research into memories and how they're made. And it's a little depressing, but it's so fascinating. It's this idea that none of our memories are real. None of them are true. Even when we're forming our memories, it's very subjective. So, that whole thing where you can have 2 people in the same room watching the same thing, they remember it differently. But also, every time you recall a memory, you overwrite it.
You're reinforcing, whatever you decide.
What you want to, exactly. So depending if you're sad or you're happy, you're anxious, whatever it is, you transfer that to the memory and it overwrites it. And then the next time you remember it, you get this overwritten version rather than the original version. So the sort of big memories, the core memories, which often are childhood memories, and that door in the cupboard was a core memory for me for whatever reason. They're the ones that change the most because you think of them the most often, and they're the ones you can trust the least. So there's this amazingly, he's just so wonderful, this French psychiatrist and neurologist called Dr. I always get his name wrong, but I think it's Boris Cyrulnik. And he's made a sort of lifetime study of this theory of childhood resilience, of this idea that children can survive almost anything in a way that adults can't. And he's had a really interesting childhood himself. He lost both his parents in the Holocaust, and he was then subsequently kind of fostered by parents who really, really neglected him and didn't look after him at all. And at around the age of 7 or 8, he became a runner for the French army. So he's like running through enemy lines to deliver, messages to the French army. So he had a very traumatic childhood. But he puts down his subsequently very successful and happy life down to this idea of childhood resilience, that some children are able to take or survive incredible trauma and incredible experiences by using fantasy as a defense mechanism, by creating this whole kind of world around what actually happened. And then they're subsequently able to process it immediately afterwards in the same reason. They expand their fantasy world, they explain what happened, and they're able to survive things that adults just wouldn't be able to. They can survive without PTSD or any kind of lasting problems at all. The problem then occurs if at no point in their lives after that are they able to process it in reality. In other words, at some point they have to be able to understand what really happened. And so that was really how the characters of Kat and Elle came about. So Kat's the child that used a fantasy to kind of get over a huge event in her life, but she never subsequently faces it in reality. She never looks at what really happened. She kind of spends her life in denial, and still to a certain extent in this kind of fantasy world. She lives in the present in her life in Ellie, because she can't sort of look to the future. She doesn't have a past, she just lives day to day, whereas Elle is the complete opposite. She also used fantasy to survive the same events, but she then was subsequently able to process it in reality. She does understand what happened, but that kind of, it helps her to an extent, but at the same time, she can't escape reality. She can't use denial. She doesn't have the luxury of denial. So she's quite a kind of embittered sort of person, whereas Kat sees herself as having quite a good life. So I partly made them identical twins because I wanted to highlight how similar they were, and they had the same experiences, but they have now had these completely different lives, these completely different reactions.
Well, and it's so interesting because in their mirror images, right? And their psychology is really a mirror image of each other, whereas one can think of nothing but the truth, how she remembers it, to the extent that it is everything to her, and the other is more in denial. There's a whole exploration of being in denial, and whether it's a strength, it's a defense mechanism, but also is it a strength too? And they and it's also very interesting. And I know we don't have that much time left, but I was wondering, kind of, you also do such a beautiful job of showing how within the same family, how there can be so much love and support, but also a real, I think on some deep level, these two, the twins have a resentment. They're estranged. They resent so deeply the way the other one has used their defense mechanisms for their childhood, that it's kind of a gulf that is very hard to cross.
Oh, it definitely. I mean, I think that writing about sisters is really interesting, particularly sisters where there's only two of you.
Right.
So it's similar to your book, which I love, The Never Never Sisters. I know Mirrorland and The Never Never Sisters are different books, but they're essentially about the same thing. They're about relationship between two estranged sisters, and also between mothers and daughters. All of those things are always very, very complex relationships.
Mm-hmm.
And with Kat and Elle, you have this kind of added secret, this terrible thing that's gone on in the past that Kat denies, and that Elle was always trying to get her to face, and she wouldn't. And then you have the love triangle with Elle's husband Ross, where that there's all sorts of things have gone on when they were adolescents and young adults, that is between the three of them, and there's so many different things that Kat has to kind of work through, but she doesn't want to. And there was I used the treasure hunt in particular, partly because that's something that I always did as a kid with my sister.
Did you?
I always set the treasure hunt. She always had to do it.
Oh.
I was always in charge. But but also because it's a brilliant plot device.
It is.
To kind of give information to the reader piecemeal. You can kind of divvy it out. You're exactly in control of how much information they get and when. So it's a good way of telling a story without inundating people with too much backstory. And with Kat and Elle in particular, when she comes back to that house, she's terrified. She doesn't want to be there. She doesn't want to face not just what's happened in the past, but she doesn't want to face what's happened to Elle now.
Right.
She doesn't want to face Ross. She doesn't want to come back to Scotland at all. It was never in her plan to do that. And so the only way I saw to make her confront what has happened to her and everything that she needs to really confront to find out the truth about what's happened to Elle, is to kind of bombard her with more of her childhood. And so a treasure hunt seemed a really good way to do that, especially as that's what Elle always did to her when they were children. So it's a way of her being forced to remember things kind of piecemeal almost. And eventually it's all kind of directing her back to Mirrorland, because Mirrorland is the thing she is the most afraid of. And Mirrorland is where everything is kind of revealed.
And it also showed, in addition to being such a great framing device, I also think it was very true to that dynamic between the sisters, that sort of, their knowledge of each other's psychology, and using how they know each other on this cellular level, even if it has caused a rift. And that is how then to know how information should be delivered, sort of. So it's a manipulation, but it makes sense based on who the characters are.
Exactly.
Yeah.
There would have been no other way that Kat would ever have faced anything that had happened unless she was made to. And probably the only person that could make her would be Elle.
Because need that power,
exactly. And mirror twins, they're of themselves are very interesting. I mean, they're very sort of ambiguous. There's not an awful lot that's known about them, but they're supposed to be. I think it's something like, I always get the science wrong, but it's something like mirror twins are created when the egg split. I think it's something like
you have it in here.
Yeah, it's something like this, like 7 to 10 days, something like that.
And it could be another person, but then
so
they have that joke that exactly. I know
they're right before they become conjoined twins. I think right on the sort of thing. So because of that reason, they're not identical. They're mirror images, and I find that really interesting as well. That one might be left-handed, right-handed, one might have a birthmark here, the other one has one here.
Right.
Sometimes their organs even are on the opposite sides of their bodies, and they're much more likely to experience ESP and all that kind of thing. So Kat really is so entrenched in denial, because she's been there for decades, that the only person that could ever do it is the person that she hates the most in the world for all the things that have happened. And so that's, even although Elle's not there, she's still kind of, Kat feels like she's still orchestrating everything that happens.
Right, that she is kind of like a pawn. Here, wait, let me just see, Adam, should I open it up? Oh, there are, okay, here we go. From questions. I know, because I was gonna say, I could keep asking you, but here's from Mary. Yeah, I have the same question that Mary does. Is there a way Americans can see the map that is in the UK version that you mentioned? Like Mary, do you mean the diagram of the house? The map of of the house?
I think, I'm not sure, I'll have to check, but I think it's on my website.
Oh, good.
CaroleJohnston.com. But otherwise, I think it's just in the UK hardback and the UK paperback.
Okay.
But that's it as far as I know.
Hopefully on your website. Okay.
Yes, hopefully my website.
I
I will
want to
check
see it
tonight.
too.
If it's not there, I'll put it on.
Yeah. Yeah, because that would be fascinating. From Donald, will you continue to explore siblings in your future books?
Oh, I don't know. I don't know. My next book is not about siblings, but
Tell us about your next book.
oh, well, my next book is called The Black House, and it's set on a fictional island, a fictional kind of satellite island that's off the west coast of the Isle of Lewis and Harris in the Outer Hebrides. And the Outer Hebrides, which is a bit of a mouthful.
No, but I'm picturing, I'm like, is it Gothic?
It is. It is. The Outer Hebrides is like a sort of an island chain. It's Scottish. It's about 40 miles west of Scotland in the Atlantic Ocean. It's kind of as far west as you can go in Scotland, which is why it's the Outer Hebrides. I think from the Outer Hebrides there is nothing until Canada. It's just it's very, very isolated. And it's a wonderful place. I love it. I've never been anywhere that I love as much as the Isle of Lewis and Harris. And I was lucky enough to stay there in, 2017, I think. I stayed there for about 9 months on this really isolated community called Cliff, right on the west coast of Lewis. And that was where I kind of finished writing Mirrorland. And while I was there, I had this idea for the second book, which always happens to me. I was like, oh, I want to start writing it.
You're
right
lucky that it happens.
Yeah. So it's a very unusual murder mystery. It's split into 2 stories. So the present day story, there's this young girl called Maggie, who goes to this fictional little island to investigate the murder of a young man called Robert 25 years before. And then the second story is told from Robert's perspective. It kind of follows his life in the 1990s all the way up to his death. Ooh. And the unusual part, I'm not allowed to reveal, I've been sworn to secrecy, but it's to do with the reason why Maggie has decided to go to this island to investigate this murder. It's a very bizarre and sort of shocking reason why she's decided to do this, but it is revealed in, I think, chapter 2, so you don't need to go very far to find why.
I like that, the early reveal.
It is a very early reveal.
That sounds amazing. Wait, and when is that out?
It's out in the summer in the UK and Commonwealth, but I don't think it's out in US and Canada until February or sort of springtime next year.
Okay, 2020. Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Anna wants to know, can you both give advice for how you know a story is worth it to keep going? That's a good question. When do you know you have a novel? That's a really good question. Do you want to take that first? And then I can draft off your answer.
Yeah. It's hard. I'm probably not a very good person to ask this to. Before the novel, I wrote short stories for sort of 10 plus years. And I think a lot of my longer works have come from initial short stories. That's how I decide whether something is worth pursuing.
Yeah.
And weirdly, Mirrorland started off life as a story set on a spaceship on the way to Jupiter. It was this love triangle. And that's where Mirrorland kind of began.
Really?
So, yeah. Yes, it was. I sold it, I think, to Tor Macmillan in the US a few years ago. It's called Skinner Box, and it is very much the sort of beginnings of Mirrorland. So that's how I do it, because I'm a hideous planner. If I'm writing a novel, even if I'm writing a short story, but particularly if I'm writing a novel, I plan for months. I outline for months, to the point where I know exactly what I'm going to put in every single chapter before I begin.
Before you start writing,
yeah,
you have the detailed outline.
Yeah, absolutely everything.
That you are
I know. but I mean, it took me years to get all those years of short stories to get that far. And it's only because that's what works for me. I like writing stories that have lots of twists and turns and reveals and surprises all the way through. But that's really hard to do without planning. I'm in awe of people who can do that without planning. They must have a million drafts, because I could never do it. And I just find it less painful to plot it out. But writing a short story about it first is what works for me. I mean, that's probably really awful advice, but that's what I would suggest, is like maybe writing something smaller, see if it works as a kind of little story in and of itself. If it does, plot it out, and then go and write it. I think you know instinctively, I think, if a story is going to work. I mean, I don't know how you feel, but you get a kind of excitement, you think yes, or you feel really flat and then you think no.
Right. And I think there is, when I first started, and I remember that I would kind of, I would think I had something, and then like there'd be this 100-page mark, and it was just kind of like everything had been explored, or you couldn't. It's kind of like being in a dead end. There were no stairs anywhere, there were no windows anywhere, there were no doors anywhere. It's not even that I think you have to know exactly what's going to happen when you first think of the idea, but there has to be things that you want to explore, either relationships between the characters or themes and dynamics that you want to kind of say something about. And so it's not even, you can think of, my guess is you can think of a really good hooky sounding plot, but if there's not that, that part of it you want to explore that's apart from the plot, kind of like how Carole was talking about the mirror twins and trauma and ways of dealing with trauma and memory, right? So your plot sort of got interwoven with all of those other ideas and dynamics that you then explored.
Definitely.
Right?
Yeah, definitely. Absolutely. I mean, and if you take your book, The Neighbor's Secret, there are so many twists in that. So many.
That was my first suspense.
The first is, well, it was brilliant, and I didn't guess any of them. And that's very, very unlikely.
I love to hear that. And but it is, I do feel like I'm still at the point where I need to when I'm writing, it shakes loose something that outlining doesn't do, but to be where you can outline for months and think on that level of detail I feel like that's got to be the most efficient way, the way you're doing it now, don't you think?
I think it isn't it? It's weird. I was talking to a really good writer friend of mine recently, Nina Allen, and she writes completely differently from me. I'm a planner and she's a pantser. She just has an idea, thinks about it for a while, sits down, starts writing. And we do write different types of stories, but essentially I was thinking, well, what is the difference? Why doesn't she plan? Why can I not write without planning these days?
Right.
But we did work out that the time it takes for us to get from an idea to a draft that we would be happy to show to an agent or an editor, publisher, whatever, is the same.
It's the same.
It's exactly the same. It's just that 50% of my time is taken outlining and planning and revising before I've even started. I tend to sort of see things like a movie in my head, which I think helps. And then 50% is writing maybe 3-4 drafts, whereas she writes maybe 10 plus drafts, but we end up in the same place at the same time.
And it takes I know. And sometimes I do wonder like how much, if it's linked to how much of a visual thinker you are versus, how you process information. What is your,
because like what you were saying there, that you need to write to get this sort of, to get the ideas or to develop ideas. I don't necessarily have that.
You can see it. You can see it.
Yeah, but I think that is just years and years of writing short stories and having to, because you maybe are only given a limit of, I don't know, 8,000 words or something. You have to think ahead, because otherwise you're going to run out of room. You're not going to be able to finish the story.
Totally. You need to make sure, because that's another thing. And then I'll loop in Adam, but I just want to say I felt like Mirrorland is so dense with detail and so fully imagined. And I could tell, like with the fantasies and the pretend play between the twins, I felt like we were getting it, but I also very much believed that there was this whole history. There were episodes of pretend play that we didn't see, but I know are there. So it had this, there was an economy to it. It was that beautiful iceberg thing where the book deals with this much, but you create a story so real that, as a reader, there's all this underneath the water. There's all this history. There's all this interfamilial dynamics. It was just so well done. And then with that, Adam, are you going to loop in, or is that? Here you go.
Yes. No, sometimes I can't find the stop video, even though I've done hundreds of these.
I think we can blame my segue because it wasn't the most graceful segue, but.
No, I love it. I love listening to both of you. Thank you so much, Allison, for moderating, and Carole for, coming overseas, really, to do this with us. Where can we find, we'll start with Allison, where can we find you on the internet? What's the best way to connect?
Oh, I think my website, www.allisonheller.com. I have a small presence on Instagram. I have to say I'm not the best at juggling Instagram with drafting, and I'm currently in drafting mode, so I'm a little bit derelict, but so you can say hi to me there, and then if that doesn't work, hop over to my email because I'm much better with email. How about you, Carole?
Perfect.
I'm the same, really. My website's probably the best place, carolejohnston.com, and that's also got all the links to Instagram, Twitter, Facebook, and also there's a contact form if you want to get in touch with me there too.
Perfect. And Tattered Cover can be found at tatteredcover.com. The most important part of the website is tatteredcover.com/event. Please continue to support amazing authors like Allison and Carole. And that's all for us. If you haven't purchased either of their books, they can be available at tatteredcover.com. When we send you this link, you could watch this as often as you want. I'll also include links to their books so you can buy them with an easy click of the button. Thank you all, and have a great afternoon if you're here in Denver, and a great evening if you're in Scotland like Carole is.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.